If you've ever, bought or sold stocks, or maybe even dealt with transferring interest in a small family business, you've probably noticed the price you agree on isn't quite the final cost.
Absolutely. There's always something else, some friction, some extra cost.
Right. And perhaps the most, well, misunderstood part of that friction is the tax that hits when assets actually change hands.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're going to unpack the Securities Transfer Tax Act 25 of 2007, the STT Act.
Yeah, this is pretty crucial stuff, whether you're just, curious about your investments, managing corporate finance, or maybe you're a law student trying to get your head around these statutes.
Our goal here is really to give you the essentials, what the Act is for, how it actually works, its key mechanisms, and maybe some of the less obvious nuances.
And it's not static, is it? This act, it dates back to 2007, started mid-2008, and it replaced an older act.
That's right, the Uncertificated Securities Tax Act.
But looking at our sources, it gets updated pretty often. Last check was March 2025, and changes went in as recently as Jan 2022. It keeps evolving.
It really has to, because its core purpose, stated very simply in the Act itself, is to provide for the levying of a securities transfer tax in respect of every transfer of any security, and deal with related matters.
So basically taxing the movement of securities.
Exactly. It's the government's main tool for taxing the transaction itself, the actual movement of that capital.
Okay, let's break it down. The basics first. What's the rate and where does the money actually go?
It's a flat rate, currently 0.25%. Quarter of a percent, and it's levied on the taxable amount of the transfer. All of it goes straight to the National Revenue Fund.
Seems straightforward enough.
On the surface, yes. But things get really interesting when you look at how changes can be made, especially regarding the Minister of Finance's role.
Yes, Section 2, subsections 2 and 3. This gives the minister quite a bit of immediate power, doesn't it? It feels like a legislative fast track.
It really does. The minister doesn't need to wait for Parliament to pass a new law in the usual way. Using the national budget speech, under the Public Finance Management Act, they can announce a change to that 0.25% rate, or even change the rules about what's exempt.
And that change happens when?
Immediately, right from the announcement date. It stays effective for up to 12 months, which gives Parliament time to catch up and legislate it properly.
Wow, so that's a pretty significant tool for reacting quickly to, say, market conditions.
Absolutely. Think about responding to sudden economic shifts, maybe stabilizing markets or countering capital flight without that long legislative lag. It's a built-in operational lever within the tax law.
So if you're an investor, you really need to pay attention to the budget speech because that 0.25% could technically change overnight.
Precisely. Now let's define what we're actually talking about taxing. What counts as a security under this act?
Good question. Is it just stocks?
It's quite specific. It includes any share or depository receipt in a company, and also, importantly, any member's interest in a close corporation. So it covers typical equity.
Okay, shares, depository receipts, CZ interests. Anything specifically excluded?
Yes, there's a key exclusion. It explicitly leaves out the debt portion of a share that's linked to a debenture. The focus is really on the ownership, the equity part being transferred.
Got it. So the tax hits on the transfer. I think most people just think sale, right? Buy and selling.
Naturally, but the Act uses a much broader definition. Transfer includes sale, of course, but also assignment, cession, or disposing of it in any other way. And crucially, it also covers cancellation or redemption of a security.
Any other way? So like if I gifted shares to someone, even without money changing hands.
Exactly. A gift is a disposal. It changes who beneficially owns the security. So yes, STT would likely be triggered.
But there must be some relief, some situations where it doesn't apply.
Oh, definitely. There are important relief valves. The big one is any event that doesn't result in a change in beneficial ownership. If the underlying owner stays the same, no tax.
Makes sense.
Also, the initial issue of a security. When a company first creates and issues stock, that's not taxed under STT.
And you mentioned cancellation.
Yeah.
But not always.
Right. Cancellation or redemption is generally a transfer. But there's an exception if it happens because the company itself is being wound up, liquidated, deregistered, basically. Its corporate life is ending. The Act isn't trying to tax the process of closing down a company.
Okay, that helps clarify the why. It's about taxing active market transfers, not corporate housekeeping or wind downs.
Precisely. Now, let's get into the mechanics, liability, and valuation. This is where things diverge based on whether the security is listed on an exchange or unlisted.
And who handles the transaction matters too, right?
Absolutely. First, scope. The tax applies to securities from companies formed in South Africa. Or if the company is foreign, it applies if its securities are listed on a South African exchange.
So foreign companies listed locally are caught in the net.
Correct. Now, for listed securities, the Act defines two key players, the member and the participant.
Let's make that clear. A member is basically your broker, the platform you use to trade.
Yeah, think of the member as the authorized user, the stockbroker, the entity facilitating the trade for you.
And the participant, that sounds more like the back office entity.
Exactly. The participant is usually the custodian or administrator, like the Central Securities Depository Participant, CSDP, or a big bank's custody division. They hold and settle the securities.
Okay, so scenario one. I buy a listed share through my online broker, a member. How's the tax worked out and who pays it?
Under Section 3, it's pretty straightforward. The taxable amount is simply the price you pay, the consideration, and the liability. It falls on the member, your broker. They collect and pay the 0.25%.
Right, so the broker handles the STT payment to SARS.
Yes. Now, scenario 2. What if the transfer happens not via a broker, but is handled by a participant? Maybe a large settlement between institutions.
How does that work under Section 4?
This is where it gets a bit more complex, mainly to prevent underdeclaration. The taxable amount is based on the consideration the buyer declares. However,
There's always a however.
right, if that declared amount is less than the lowest price that security traded at on the exchange that day, or if no amount is declared at all, then the taxable amount automatically becomes the closing price of the security on that day.
Ah, okay. So it's a floor value based on market prices. A way to stop people saying they transferred R1 million worth of shares for, say, R100 just to dodge tax.
Precisely. It sets a minimum valuation based on actual market activity. And in this case, the liability shifts. The participant, the custodian handling the transfer, is responsible for the tax.
Okay, listed sorted. Now, what about unlisted securities, like shares in a private company or that close corporation interest we mentioned,
Yeah.
Section 6, right?
Correct. For unlisted stuff, the benchmark is market value. The taxable amount is the consideration given. But if that consideration is less than the actual market value, or even zero, then the market value is used for the tax calculation.
So again, ensuring tax is based on the real economic value, even in private deals.
Exactly. And if it's a cancellation or redemption of an unlisted security, the value used is the market value just before it was canceled, as if it still existed.
And the liability. Who pays for unlisted transfers? This is interesting.
It shifts quite dramatically. For unlisted securities, the liability falls directly onto the company that issued the security.
The company itself, not the buyer or seller. Why? It seems odd.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive at first glance, but the thinking is likely about practicality and enforcement. The company is a stable, registered entity. It's much easier for the Revenue Service to track and ensure compliance from the issuing company rather than potentially numerous private individual shareholders.
So it pins the responsibility on the most easily regulated entity involved.
That's the likely rationale. But crucially, this doesn't mean the company ultimately bears the cost.
Ah, which brings us to Section 7, the recovery part.
Yes, Section 7 makes it clear. Whichever party is legally liable, be it the member, the participant, or the issuing company, has the legal right to recover the STT amount they paid from the person who received the security.
The acquirer.
The buyer, exactly. So the intermediary or the company acts as the collection agent, but the economic burden ultimately lands on the person acquiring the asset. That's a really key point for listeners.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift gears to exemptions. This is vital for corporate finance folks and lawyers, especially the links to corporate restructuring.
Right. The STT Act tries not to hinder legitimate business reorganizations. So it smartly links many of its exemptions to specific sections of the Income Tax Act, the big tax law from 1962. If a transaction qualifies for tax neutrality under certain Income Tax Act rules, it's often exempt from STT too.
Can you give us a sense of the types of transactions we're talking about without getting lost in section numbers?
Sure. Think about standard corporate restructuring moves. Things like asset for share deals, where you swap company assets for shares, amalgamations, which are basically mergers, intragroup transactions, moving assets around within a corporate group, and unbundling, where a company spins off a division or subsidiary.
And how do you prove you qualify?
The company's public officer usually needs to provide a sworn statement, an affidavit, confirming the transaction meets all the requirements of the relevant Income Tax Act section. If that's done, the share transfer involved in that restructure is exempt from STT.
It shows the system trying to allow businesses to reorganize efficiently without adding extra transaction tax costs.
Exactly. Beyond those big M&A type exemptions, there are also crucial ones for specific financial instruments, particularly short-term lending and collateral deals.
Right, where shares might be moved temporarily.
Yes, but the rules are very strict to qualify for exemption here. For a securities lending arrangement, there has to be a contract where the borrower promises to return an identical security within 12 months.
Identical is key.
Absolutely. And the borrower has to pay the lender any dividends or distributions they receive while holding the share. Critically, the lender must keep their economic exposure. The risk and reward of the share's value can't shift away from them just because of the loan.
So it has to really be a temporary loan, not a disguised sale.
Precisely. If the lender is still effectively holding the economic risk, then no STT applies to the temporary transfer out and back.
And similar rules for collateral.
Very similar logic. If you provide shares as security for a debt, a
Right.
collateral arrangement, the transfer is exempt if the identical shares are returned within 24 months this time. Longer period, but same principle. It must be temporary.
These tight rules prevent abuse, making sure these exemptions are only used for genuine short-term financing needs.
Correct. Now, there's another category of exemptions based more on public policy and the status of the entity involved.
Like charities.
Yes. Transfers to registered public benefit organizations, PBOs, are exempt, along with certain other institutions doing public benefit work. Also, transfers involving any sphere of the South African government or even foreign governments are exempt.
Diplomatic and intergovernmental finance flows aren't taxed.
Right. And that extends to major international bodies, too. Transfers involving entities like the World Bank, the IMF, the African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, those are exempt.
Facilitating global development finance.
Exactly. And one last important one related to avoiding double tax. Unlisted securities. If the transfer of an unlisted security is already subject to transfer duty, or if the deal attracts VAT, then STT doesn't apply on top of that.
You don't pay twice on the same transfer.
Makes sense. So those are the main exemptions. Now let's look at provisions designed for specific modern finance and critically anti-avoidance.
Okay, what about specialized structures?
Section 8A is a great example of the Act adapting. It deals specifically with Sharia-compliant financing, particularly murabaha arrangements. This is where typically a financier buys an asset, like a security, and immediately sells it to their client at a pre-agreed markup.
How does STT handle that two-step process? Does it get taxed twice?
No, they use what are called deeming provisions to avoid that. The Act deems the financier, who only holds the share momentarily, not to have acquired beneficial ownership, and it deems the client to have acquired beneficial ownership directly from the original seller.
Clever. So it ensures the tax hits only once, on the real economic transfer to the end client.
Exactly. It aligns the tax treatment with the economic substance. But this flexibility is balanced by some very strong anti-avoidance powers given to the commissioner under Section 9.
The power to tackle schemes designed just to dodge tax.
Yes, this is a really potent tool. If the commissioner believes a scheme, a series of transactions, was entered into solely or mainly just to get an STT tax benefit, meaning reducing, avoiding, or even just postponing the tax, they can disregard the scheme.
And impose the tax as if the scheme never happened.
Essentially, yes. They determine the liability as it would have been without the artificial steps.
What makes a scheme look suspicious to the commissioner? What are the red flags?
The Act points to a couple of things. Schemes that use steps not normally employed for genuine business reasons other than getting the tax break, or schemes that create weird rights or obligations you wouldn't normally see between parties dealing independently at arm's length.
And there's a presumption involved. That makes it tough for the taxpayer.
Absolutely. This is the kicker. If this scheme does result in a tax benefit, the law presumes it was done solely or mainly for that benefit, unless the taxpayer can prove otherwise.
So the burden of proof shifts completely. You have to prove your legitimate business purpose wasn't just a cover for tax avoidance.
Exactly. That presumption is a very strong deterrent against contrived schemes.
Okay, pulling this all together then, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the STT Act?
Well, I think the main thing is that it's far more complex and nuanced than just a simple 0.25% tax. Who pays it, the member, the participant, the company, and how it's calculated, declared price, lowest price, closing price, market value. It all depends entirely on the type of security and how it's transferred.
It's a comprehensive system designed to tax capital movements, but with specific carve-outs for business efficiency and recognized policy goals.
Right. It tries to be broad, but also targeted.
Which leads us nicely to our final thought for you, the listener, something to really chew on, coming from Section 10 of the Act.
Section 10. The gatekeeper, as you called it earlier. It's quite stark. It basically says that no tax exemption found in any other piece of South African law automatically applies to STT.
Unless it's in an international treaty under the Constitution.
Correct. Otherwise, any exemption or relief from STT has to be found within the STT Act itself.
So here's the provocative question. Think about all the other laws out there that might grant tax exemptions to certain entities or transactions. How many of those seemingly clear exemptions are actually overridden or nullified when it comes to STT simply because Section 10 says you must find your exemption here in this act?
It means you always, always have to check the STT Act specifically. You can't rely on general exemptions elsewhere. A powerful reminder about how specific tax laws interact or sometimes override each other.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Thanks for joining us for this detailed look at the Securities Transfer Tax Act.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.